Thanks for tuning in. Join me today as I take a Kenwood Model 11 that was found rotting away in a Florida attic and bring it back to making music. If you enjoy vintage audio equipment, you've come to the right spot. Please subscribe and hit that notification bell, as well as giving me a big thumbs up if you like this video, and share it with others. There is a risk of serious injury or death from electrical shock working on this equipment. If you're not comfortable with working on the equipment, please do not take the cover off and consult a professional. The Kenwood Model 11 AM/FM stereo receiver came in 3 different flavors. The one was 60 watts per channel into 8 ohms. The 2 was 80 watts per channel into 8 ohms. And this unit, the 3, was 120 watts per channel into 8 ohms. The Kenwood 11 has a speaker impedance detector. This is what Kenwood calls it, and they say it discovers whether you have a 4 ohm or 8 ohm speaker connected, and it automatically changes the power supply to the power amp stage accordingly, and depending what the circuitry sees, and uses a different tap off the power transformer. The Kenwood 11 also has Dolby FM circuitry built into it, as well as a complete Dolby system for your tape decks. All the manufacturers were putting the capability into their equipment, but it just never took off. It's a little bit unusual as it has a built-in timer built into it. I don't think I ever saw any other piece of equipment with that, a hi-fi piece of equipment anyway. It has 2 phono inputs, an auxiliary. It has 2 tape monitor inputs. It has a mic input also. So it's full-featured. Tone controls, bass, mid-range, and treble, high and low filter, kind of your standard stuff. I did a little research for this video to learn a little bit more about the Kenwood company history. I knew that Kenwood, previous to being named Kenwood, the company was named Trio, because I have a Trio vacuum tube receiver, a W40, that's in my collection. So from owning that, I knew Kenwood was part of Trio. The Kenwood name came out of the Trio name. What I didn't know is how did they change from Trio to Kenwood. There was a distributor that imported Trio electronics into the U.S. They established themselves here in the States, it looks like around 1963. And there was a bilingual employee that worked for this importer. He spoke both Japanese and English. And he came up with the name Kenwood. The first part of Kenwood, the Ken, was a well-known name here in the United States because of Kenmore appliances. At the time, they dominated, and they had a reputation for being excellent, and so thought, well, Kenmore appliances. Now the wood, according to my research, it's just referring to a durable substance, as well as suggesting somehow it relates to Hollywood, California. But it's plausible. I mean, I can see that. So that's what I just wanted to pass that along to y'all. I thought that was an interesting part of Kenwood's history. I never knew it. Kenwood audio equipment wasn't as well known as Pioneer, Sansui, Marantz, and several other brands. One of the first real hi-fi products I ever bought was a Kenwood KA3500 integrated amplifier, and I still own it today, but they built some really outstanding equipment. All right, enough with the history lessons. I want to talk to you today about a Kenwood 11 III that I picked up, and also in general about pieces of equipment you may see out there that just look hopeless, that just look like I'm leaving it behind because there's nothing I can do with it. Many times these units that look terrible can come back to life, and they can have many more decades of service. This Kenwood 11 III was in a Florida attic for many years. I obtained it from an antique dealer here in my area. He's not into electronics. He cleaned out an estate, and it was in there. I asked him about it, as I do all of my pieces. I just find that very enjoyable to find out the history of it, if it has one. Well, in this case, all he knew was from the family is that it was up in an attic for many, many years in Florida. So Florida, if you know Florida, it's about the worst place you could store your electronics. But I saw it, and he really had no use for it. It's not his thing, electronics, so I picked it up. And it is really, looks like it's been in a Florida attic for, many years. It's just a mess from end to end, both externally and internally. But I've picked up units like this before, and they're not necessarily hopeless. Some of them are. Many times you can get them going again, and they'll be just as reliable as a piece that was sitting in its original box and looks perfect. With that being said, this one needed to go outside. That's always the best place to go if you can. Take it outside and blow that stuff out with an air compressor or a can of dust off, or a brush, or whatever it is you want to use, and just leave the mess outside. I removed the face plate, the knobs, and I knew I was going to do a lot of cleaning with it. I did know that, and also I assumed there was some issues with it, not being able to operate properly. What I did before powering it up, I took a good look at everything, as I said, and got the worst of the dirt and dust out of it and off of it, and I powered it up with a Variac. I noticed right away that many of the bulbs were burned out. Some worked, some didn't, but no big surprise, right? It's 40 years old. What I did, I made a few LEDs myself. Sometimes I buy these kits you see on the internet. Sometimes I make them myself, just whatever I guess I feel like doing at the time. And so I made LED replacements. I believe there were 9 of them. The indicator lights, the FM, the aux, the phono, etc. There were 9 of those, and I did that. And while I was able to I didn't disassemble the whole unit to deox the pots and the control switches. I could get to them, and I wanted to see what I had before I moved on. So I did kind of a little bit of a deox treatment on the switches and the controls. I also cleaned up the back. It was bad. The RCA jacks and the speaker jacks, they were pretty rough. You could tell the back of the unit had some issues, banged up, and also this unit has a timer in it, which is pretty unusual for a hi-fi unit back in the 70s. But anyway, it had one, and it was broken, and so I bypassed the timer so the unit would power up. I found out I got it powered up on the Variac, and I was surprised it actually, as I said, did power up. After powering it up, I found that I had some intermittent audio. It would play along fine, and then all of a sudden it would shut off. Both the left and right channel. It would be fine, then it wouldn't. So I did a little bit of troubleshooting with that. I took a plastic rod and tapped the speaker relay, the power amp assembly, and sure enough, it would come, it would go, it would come, it would go. So I was pretty sure it was the relay, and this is not an uncommon problem in vintage audio equipment. So I put in a new relay, which, by the way, these are still available, which is great. You can get brand new relays to fix your 40-year-old vintage receiver, so that's a great thing. Omron makes most of them. I went ahead and put that in. Had to disassemble it a little bit to get that in there, but I had to do it. So I put the new relay in, gave it a try, and sure enough, worked great. I could tap that relay all day long with plastic rod, you know, just tap along, and it was great. So I thought, well, good, that's behind me. And so I had it up on the test bench, and suddenly I would lose my right channel. Left channel was all right. And I thought, oh boy, maybe it wasn't that speaker relay. After some troubleshooting, I determined whatever the issue was coming from the speaker selector board. Again, I took my little plastic rod and started just pushing on it and hitting it a little bit. And sure enough, the right channel would come and go, come and go. So the first thing I did was to clean the pins from the connectors on the speaker selector board, and it made no difference. It wasn't a bad thing to clean those anyway, but that wasn't the problem. I took a look at the solder on the speaker selector board, and I noticed what I thought was a little bit of cracking. And again, this is not uncommon after 40 years. And I reflowed the solder, and bingo. I mean, I could do anything I wanted to the board. You know, I'd hit it with a little plastic rod. It was fine. It was nice and stable. And I left it up on the bench a couple hours, and it ran great. So I felt pretty good that it was pretty solid. You guys that follow my videos know, though, what are you doing here? How about those electrolytic capacitors you always say gotta go? Well, they do have to go. But in this unit's case, it was in such a shape, that rough shape, that I thought it was better to go ahead and just find out what was wrong with the unit first before I pushed on with that. So I did a little bit of bench testing. Boy, does it look a lot nicer, if nothing else. You know, I mean, it's really a beautiful receiver. It really cleaned up, gorgeous. And as I mentioned before, it was nice to have all the knobs and switches. Those weren't missing, so they cleaned up really nice. I did some basic testing on the bench just to make sure it seemed pretty solid. Left it up and ran it a couple hours. Put a little wax on that beat up case, just made it look a little bit better. And in many ways, for me, it's more rewarding for me to get a unit like this going again. Basically a train wreck. It was in very, very rough shape. This shows you the toughness and the durability of the old vintage audio equipment. This thing was shown no respect for a long time, and now there's no reason. I'm sure it'll outlive me and the next guy down the road in 40 years, fixing it to keep it going for another 40. I wouldn't be surprised. So I will revisit this unit. I will change out those old electrolytic capacitors. So if any of you guys are at the flea market or at an estate sale, or maybe you've even got something in your own garage or your closet, these units can come back, they can be brought back to life, and they can be reliable. They can still be decent looking. So don't ever give up on a beat up piece of old vintage stereo equipment. I hope you enjoyed this video of my Kenwood 11 III. If you did, please give me a big thumbs up down below. For you non-subscribers, if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more like it, please subscribe. And you guys out there that have been with me from the beginning, what can I tell you? All I can tell you every time is thank you so much. You all have a good day.